Welcome to the Partis channel. Today, we explain Genesis chapter 21 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We are looking at a text that is full of absolute dramatic whiplash. I mean, in just one single chapter, we're going to move from the highest highs of joyous celebration to the absolute lowest lows of human desperation, and finally into the complex world of ancient geopolitical negotiations. We're looking closely at the original text, relying purely on its plain, literal meaning, what we call the pashhat. No mystical layers, no deep allegories, just the clear, straightforward narrative of who, what, where, and why. We're going to witness a miraculous birth, a heartbreaking exile into a deadly desert, and a really tense meeting over water rights in a foreign land. So, get comfortable, and let's thoroughly break down the text of Genesis chapter 21, step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our chronological roadmap for navigating these distinct mini-stories within the chapter: the birth of Isaac, Hagar and Ishmael exiled, survival in the desert, the Treaty of Beersheba, and finally, key themes and lessons. Let's begin.
Part 1, the birth of Isaac, covering verses 1 through 7.
We open the chapter focusing on the joyful realization of God's promise to Abraham and Sarah. Now, you have to remember the context here. Abraham and Sarah have literally been waiting decades for a child together. Abraham is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90. From a purely human biological standpoint, the window for having a child has long since closed. Yet, look at this quote from the text. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Notice how the text explicitly repeats the concept of a promise fulfilled. It says, as he had said, and what he had promised right next to each other. The author wants to make it absolutely clear that the birth of Isaac is an explicit, direct fulfillment of earlier textual promises. Sarah conceives and bears a son at the exact time God had promised. And in the ancient world, and certainly in this text, an heir is everything. It's the continuation of the family name, the inheritance, and in this specific case, the continuation of the divine covenant. The agonizing wait is finally over.
Which brings us to a very specific detail in verse 4. The number 8. Abraham circumcised his son Isaac exactly on the 8th day. This number anchors the narrative in specific text details that were established in earlier chapters. God had previously commanded Abraham that every male among his descendants must be circumcised on the 8th day as a physical sign of the covenant. By doing this, Abraham is demonstrating immediate, strict obedience to God's law. Now let's clarify the name of this child. Abraham names him Isaac. In Hebrew, the name is Yitzchak, which literally translates to he laughs. And this is a really profound reference back to previous chapters where both Abraham and Sarah actually laughed in disbelief when they were told they'd have a child at their advanced age. But here, in chapter 21, Sarah says, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. The meaning of the laughter has completely transformed. It's no longer the laughter of doubt. It is now the laughter of pure, unadulterated joy and miraculous fulfillment.
Part 2, Hagar and Ishmael exiled, covering verses 8 through 14.
The text tells us that the child Isaac grew and was weaned, which was a massive milestone for survival in the ancient world. Infant mortality was incredibly high back then in the Near East, so a child surviving to the point of being weaned, usually around 2 or 3 years of age, meant they had a much stronger chance of making it to adulthood. Because of this, Abraham holds a great feast on the day Isaac is weaned. But it's exactly during this grand celebration that a bitter family fracture occurs. Sarah observes Hagar's teenage son Ishmael mocking Isaac. Now, the text doesn't explicitly describe the exact nature of the mocking, but the result, explosive. She goes to Abraham with a strict, completely non-negotiable demand. Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. She is fiercely protecting the physical and spiritual inheritance of her biological son, perceiving Ishmael as a direct threat. This places Abraham in just an agonizing position. The text notes that this matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. Remember, Ishmael is Abraham's own flesh and blood too. He's loved and raised this boy for over a decade.
And this brilliantly illustrates the diverging destinies ordained by God when he steps in to reassure a deeply distressed Abraham. God speaks to Abraham and tells him not to be distressed about the boy and the maidservant. Surprisingly, God tells Abraham, listen to whatever Sarah tells you. Let's break down why God says this. He's clarifying the futures of both boys. For Isaac, God confirms that it is through him that Abraham's specific covenant offspring will be reckoned. Isaac is the primary heir of the covenant lineage. But God doesn't abandon Ishmael. On the contrary, God makes a firm promise regarding Ishmael as well. He says, I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. God is formally separating the two lines. He's providing a distinct, protected future for both of Abraham's sons, allowing Abraham to follow Sarah's harsh demand with the absolute assurance that Ishmael will survive. Reassured by that promise, Abram acts with solemn obedience. Early the next morning, Abram takes some food and a skin of water, gives them to Hagar, sets them on her shoulders, and sends her and the boy away. This is such a stark, heartbreaking scene. We really have to pause to understand the literal, practical reality of what's happening here. A skin of water and some bread will not last long in the ancient Near Eastern climate. Abram is entirely placing their survival into God's hands. He equips them with the bare minimum and sends them out. The text tells us that Hagar went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. She's now a single mother, cast out of a wealthy, secure household, wandering into an arid, unforgiving wasteland with her son. Part 3, Survival in the Desert, verses 15 through 21.
This is without a doubt one of the most agonizing and emotional journeys described in the text. Hagar and Ishmael aren't just travelers anymore. They're exiles rapidly running out of resources in a notoriously harsh geographic location. Let's walk through the steps of this desperate survival narrative exactly as the text lays them out. Step 1, wandering until the water runs out. The inevitable happens. The skin of water Abraham provided is completely emptied. In that desert heat, dehydration sets in quickly, especially for a youth. Step 2, placing the boy under a bush. Hagar realizes her son is going to die. Unable to bear the sight of it, she places him under the meager shade of one of the desert bushes. Step 3, sitting a bow shot away to weep. She walks away. The text says about a bow shot away, which is a distance far enough so she doesn't have to watch him take his last breath, but close enough to remain near him. She sits down and she just begins to sob loudly. It's a picture of total human helplessness. But then, step 4 changes absolutely everything. The text notes something very specific here. It says, God heard the boy crying. God hears the child. And the angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven. The angel asks her what's the matter, tells her not to be afraid, and repeats the promise that God will make Ishmael into a great nation. Then, God opens Hagar's eyes, and she suddenly sees a well of water right there in the desert. She goes, fills the skin, and gives the dying boy a drink.
With that miraculous intervention, the immediate crisis is averted, and we actually see the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. Ishmael survives. The text tells us that God was with the boy as he grew up. And, he doesn't return to Abraham's household. Instead, he fully embraces the wilderness. He lives in the desert of Paran, a region further south, and becomes an expert archer, securing his ability to hunt and defend himself. Finally, the text notes that his mother, Hagar, who is herself Egyptian, gets a wife for him from Egypt. This detail beautifully closes the loop on their heritage and concludes this narrative arc by noting Ishmael's firm establishment as the patriarch of his own family line, confirming God's earlier promise to make him into a great nation. Part 4, the Treaty of Beersheba, verses 22 through 34. Now we shift from a domestic survival story to a formal geopolitical negotiation. This is between Abraham and Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, in the region of Gerar, who actually brings Pishgal, the commander of his forces, along with him. The fact that a king brings the commander of his army to meet with Abraham tells us a lot. Abraham has grown significantly in wealth, power, and influence. He's no longer just a wandering nomad. He is a force to be reckoned with, requiring actual diplomatic attention from local rulers. Let's look at how this unfolds. First, Abimelech opens by acknowledging Abraham's divine backing. He says, God is with you in everything you do. That's a huge statement from a foreign king. Second, because of this, Abimelech asks for a sworn oath. He wants Abraham to swear before God that he won't deal falsely with Abimelech or his descendants, and that Abraham will show the same kindness to the country that Abimelech has shown him. Third, Abraham agrees to swear the oath, but he uses this diplomatic meeting to air a major grievance. He complains to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had forcibly seized. In a desert climate, water is wealth, and it is life. Stealing a well is practically an act of war. Abimelech claims ignorance, saying he literally hadn't heard about it until that very day. Fourth, to resolve the tension and formalize their peace, they agree to a treaty. Abraham brings sheep and cattle and gives them to Abimelech as the physical components of making a binding covenant. But Abraham does something highly specific to address that stolen well. He sets apart exactly 7 ewe lambs from the flock. Abimelech is confused and asks him, "What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves?" Abraham replies that Abimelech must accept these 7 lambs directly from Abraham's hand, as a formal physical witness that Abraham was the one who dug the specific well. By accepting the 7 lambs, Abimelech is legally and publicly acknowledging Abraham's ownership of the well, securing Abraham's vital water rights in a foreign land. So the crucial point is how this event permanently names the location. The text says that place was called Beersheba. Let's look at the literal translation of that Hebrew word. Bir means well. Sheba is tied to the Hebrew word for 7, and it's also the root word for swearing an oath. Therefore, Beersheba directly translates to well of 7 or well of the oath. The name of the city itself becomes a permanent historical marker of the 7 lambs and the sworn treaty of peace between Abraham and Abimelech.
Following the successful treaty, Abimelech and his commander return home. Abraham, who is now completely secure in his resources and his borders, performs a final act of worship and settlement. The text says Abraham plants a tamarisk tree in Beersheba. Now, planting a slow-growing tree like a tamarisk is a profound statement of permanence. He isn't just pitching a tent for the night anymore. He is putting down real roots. There, by the tree and the well, he calls upon the name of the Lord, identifying God as El Olam, the eternal God. The chapter closes by noting that Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. He has finally found a true measure of peace and stability.
Part 5, Key Themes and Lessons Synthesis.
So, what do a miraculous birth, a desert exile, and a geopolitical treaty have in common? Well, they all deal with fulfillment and survival. Let's synthesize the core themes we've just seen. In verses 1 through 7, the focus is the birth of Isaac, and the core theme is divine providence. It shows us that God's timing is incredibly precise, even when human beings think the clock has completely run out. In verses 8 through 21, the focus is Hagar and Ishmael, and the core theme is survival and compassion. Even in the midst of harsh human rejection and exile, the text highlights a God who sees the outcast and literally hears the cries of a dying child in the desert. Finally, in verses 22 through 34, the focus is the Abimelech treaty, and the core theme is securing the future. Abraham uses wisdom, diplomacy, and direct confrontation to secure resources for his newly established family. All 3 sections, as different as they seem, deal with how a family survives physically, how promises survive the test of time, and how peace survives through clear agreements.
Here is what you should really take away from this. 3 direct, simple life lessons derived purely from the literal events of the chapter. First, God's promises are ultimately fulfilled. The birth of Isaac teaches us so much about patience and the reality that divine timelines rarely align with our human expectations. Second, God hears the cries of the vulnerable and afflicted. The story of Hagar and Ishmael in the desert is just a powerful reminder that compassion extends far beyond the primary characters of a story. God provides water and a future for the exiled and the desperate. Third, there is immense value in establishing clear, peaceful boundaries with neighbors. Abraham didn't just passively trust that things would work out. He actively negotiated a treaty, brought up grievances clearly, and secured his rights to the well. Practical wisdom and diplomacy are absolutely essential. Which leaves us with a powerful question to reflect on. How do we faithfully secure our own futures while navigating the inevitable conflicts of life? Abraham had to navigate immense domestic heartbreak and high-stakes foreign diplomacy, all while trusting in a larger promise. It really challenges us to look at how we handle our own moments of conflict, waiting, and resolution. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.